Subcommittee on Federal Lands will come to order without objection. The chair is authorized to declare a recess of the subcommittee at any time. The subcommittee is meeting today to consider four bills. H.R. 1945 by Representative Onder, H.R. 2290, Representative Dingell, H.R. 2306, Representative Moolenaar, H.R. 4285 by Representative Maloy. I ask unanimous consent that the following members be allowed to participate in today's hearing. From the dais, the gentle lady from Michigan, Ms. Dingell, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Moolenaar, and the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Onder. Without objection, so ordered. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chairman and the ranking minority member. I therefore ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted in accordance with Committee Rule 3, Parent O. Without objection, so ordered. I'll now recognize myself for an opening statement. I'd like to welcome everybody back to the committee after our 4th of July recess. Hope you all had a great 4th of July. Earlier this month, we didn't just celebrate our country's independence, we celebrated a major win for the American people. On the 4th of July, President Trump signed the One Big Beautiful Bill into law, delivering on key promises to restore responsible forest management, unleash American energy, and roll back the Biden administration's wasteful spending spree. This landmark bill follows the framework laid out in President Trump's executive orders, prioritizing active land management, reviving our nation's commitment to energy dominance, and eliminating costly, ineffective programs tucked into the so-called Inflation Reduction Act. This historic legislation puts common sense and stewardship ahead of the bureaucracy and radical climate ideology. But just as important, this legislation reflects the kind of vision we should carry into the next year as we celebrate America's 250th anniversary. The One Big Beautiful Bill strengthens access to our public lands and national parks by investing in events, celebrations, and activities surrounding America 250. Through these events, we can remind everyday Americans about our country's rich history and what makes us the greatest nation in the world. And as President Trump reminded us with his Garden of Heroes initiative, our history is worth celebrating, not tearing down. That's what brings us here today. As part of the lead-up to the Semiquincentennial, say that 3 times, today's hearing considers 4 proposals that honor key figures, historic milestones, and the landmarks that tell America's story. We'll begin with H.R. 1945 from Representative Onder, which would designate America's National Churchill Museum in Fulton, Missouri as a National Historic Landmark. This museum marks the site of Churchill's famous 1946 Iron Curtain speech, a defining moment in the Cold War and a reminder of the strength of freedom-loving nations working together. We'll also consider H.R. 2290, led by Congresswoman Dingell and Representative Fulcher, to authorize the placement of a memorial honoring the millions of American women who contributed to the war effort during World War II. Their work on the home front was vital to Allied success and deserves permanent recognition. Next is H.R. 2306, the Adams Memorial Great American Heroes Act, introduced by Representative Moolenaar. This bipartisan bill reauthorizes the commission charged with building a memorial to the Adams family, including John Adams, the first Vice President and second President of the United States, his wife Abigail, and their son, John Quincy, the 6th President of the United States, whose leadership helped form the bedrock of our republic. While I am concerned about the spending authorized in this legislation, I look forward to hearing more about the proposed location of this memorial. President John Adams once said that our obligations to our country never cease but with our lives. Representative Moolenaar's legislation ensures that the Adams family's many contributions and overwhelming sense of obligation to our great nation will not cease with the passage of time. Finally, we will consider the STARS Act, introduced by Representative Maloy. This legislation designates September 17, 2026, Constitution Day and Citizenship Day as a fee-free day at the National Park Service sites. It's a smart, symbolic step to help Americans of all backgrounds participate in the Semiquincentennial and connect with the public lands and history we all share. I can think of no better way to celebrate our country than encouraging people to enjoy what is frequently referred to as America's best idea, our national parks. Each of these bills supports the goals of America 250 to educate, commemorate, and unify all Americans, and each reminds us that honoring our past is essential to securing our future. This subcommittee is proud to work with the administration to advance legislation that codifies President Trump's executive orders. In particular, the legislation on today's agenda directly supports President Trump's executive orders on celebrating America's 250th birthday and making the District of Columbia safe and beautiful. I want to thank all the bill's sponsors for their leadership and extend my appreciation to the witnesses today. Your work helped bring these ideas to life and ensure the American story continues to be told proudly and truthfully. With that, I now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Neguse, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to my colleagues and to the witnesses who are here today. Thank you all for being here and look forward to your testimony. We appreciate you sharing your time, your expertise, and your stories at the subcommittee. I'd also like to take a moment to recognize one of our witnesses here today, Ms. Kenny, who testified before this subcommittee. Hard to believe, this was 6 years ago. Back in 2019, I served on the committee at the time, and I believe you were in high school at that time, and now returning here as a recent college graduate. So congratulations on your accomplishment, and having now testified in front of the United States Congress twice is certainly a very notable achievement. Ms. Kenny's history with the World War II Women's Memorial started back when she was in the 5th grade, and so very inspiring to see someone so committed to an issue from such a young age and continuing that work. The World War II Women's Memorial Act, introduced by Representative Dingell and Representative Fulcher, is an important piece of legislation to authorize the placement of a memorial in the National Mall to honor the over 18 million women who served on the home front during World War II, as the chairman articulated. Last Congress, I was proud to sponsor and pass legislation of a similar nature authorizing the Women's Suffrage National Monument to be placed on the National Mall. And through that process, really learned just how underrepresented women's history is on the National Mall and across our memorials. And so I'm very grateful for your efforts here, and I certainly look forward to bringing my young daughter Natalie to the National Mall one day to show her both this monument and the Women's Suffrage Monument as well, and to honor the women who have proudly shaped our country. It's important, I agree with the chairman, about celebrating our shared American heritage at our national parks and honoring stories that call for historical reflection. I would be remiss if I just didn't take a moment here to also acknowledge, I'll acknowledge two elephants in the room, but the first is what's happening at our national parks with respect to the signage. I think, as the chairman is aware, just by way of example, I first introduced the Amachi National Historic Site Act in April 2021 to enact protections for that site with Representative Ken Buck, one of our dear colleagues, a Republican member and a friend of mine from Colorado. That memorial honors a site where thousands of Japanese Americans were incarcerated during World War II. Unfortunately, the Trump administration has now begun installing signage in all of our national parks, including the Amachi site, asking visitors to report what they deem as, quote, negative views or information about America or American history. I find it a bit disconnected for this committee to consider new legislation, which I support, to create new memorials that honor American history while the Trump administration is engaged in some sort of odd, obtuse censorship at these same memorials that the Congress is attempting to create. And I hope that we can find an opportunity to address that issue as well. I know we're going to hear testimony on legislation to designate America's National Churchill Museum in Missouri as a National Historic Landmark. Certainly something I support. The museum is, of course, located at Westminster College, where Churchill delivered his Iron Curtain speech in 1946. And as we hear testimony in this bill, very important to remember how that speech reflected on the dangers of impeachment and the importance of standing up for democratic values. And so I'm certainly looking forward to that. H.R. 2306, the Adams Memorial Great American Heroes Act, again, legislation that I support. I think one of the tragedies here in our nation's capital is that of all of our founding fathers, that the President Adams and his son, John Quincy Adams, and of course the Adams family more broadly, are not recognized properly here in our nation's capital. My understanding is this has been a long time coming. It's been almost 20 years and I'm hopeful that we can really make some durable progress. And finally, I certainly support the STARS Act, Ms. Maloy's legislation to provide free entry to national parks next year on Constitution Day in celebration of the 250th anniversary of the United States, encouraging Americans to get outside, enjoying our public lands. Certainly a great way to celebrate our nation. But again, and this is not with reference to Ms. Maloy, because I think, again, her legislation is legislation I support. But that second elephant in the room that I was alluding to is that the Appropriations Committee is meeting right now, not that far from here. They're doing markups over fiscal year 2026's budget, and that includes the National Park Service, which is being gutted, totally gutted. Thousands of employees terminated, laid off, part of reductions in force, mass attrition, and it is unclear to me. I mean, I'm all for providing more opportunities for American citizens to enjoy our national parks. I'm not sure how they're going to do that if there's no one there staffing them. And so I hope we could have a conversation, broader conversation, that links those two important components to our national parks. And with that, I will yield back and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you to the ranking member, Mr. Nagus. We will now move on to our first panel, which consists of members who are sponsoring today's legislation. I recognize Representative Maloy for 5 minutes on H.R. 4285.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll be celebrating the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence next year, and it's going to be a big year-long celebration. My state, Utah, kicked it off on July 4th this year, and I was reflecting with my team on what we could do to help get as many Americans involved in this celebration as possible, because if it's important to celebrate these milestones and make sure that people have time to stop and reflect on what's so important about the idea of an independent United States turning 250 years old. So to honor the anniversary, I introduced the Semiquincentennial Tourism and Access to Recreation Sites Act, the STARS Act, which directs the Secretary of Interior to designate September 17th, Constitution Day, next year as a free day at all National Park Service sites. The STARS Act gives every American the opportunity to celebrate our 250th anniversary in the places that connect us to our founding, our future, and our shared values. Ooh, I don't know what that was. Whether you are an American whose ancestors came here on the Mayflower, or you are a newly minted citizen of the United States, or anything in between, we can all celebrate this milestone together. We're all beneficiaries of the Declaration of Independence. The National Park Service manages over 400 sites across the United States, including historic battlefields, monuments, and cultural landmarks. Utah is home to 5 national parks. We call them the Mighty Five. 3 of them are in the 2nd District that I represent. It attracts a lot of visitation and serves as a model for celebrating the United States and who we are as a nation. By designating an entrance-free day in 2026, we'll allow families and communities to celebrate the monumental milestone together with greater access to some of our most impressive places. This legislation encourages Americans to connect with the nation's history and natural beauty by making our national parks accessible to absolutely everybody. Something I think a lot of people don't realize is that in 1776, Fathers Dominguez and Escalante were exploring and traveling across Utah, exploring some of the same landscapes that we'll be opening up to visitation. And I hope that people will take the time. They'll go to the parks. We chose Constitution Day on purpose. I think it's a nice combination of celebrating the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, which is the ultimate law of the land, and one of our best ideas, the national parks. The ideas that made us a free nation are what make us exceptional in the world, and our natural landscapes are also exceptional and world-class. And I think the combination of getting out and enjoying those landscapes, enjoying the historic sites that the Park Service manages, and taking some time together as communities and families to reflect on both the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence are just what this nation needs right now. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Maloy. I now recognize Representative Dingell for 5 minutes on H.R. 2290.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing today on several bills regarding national monuments and memorials, which all tell the story of our history and help us know who we are. I thank you in particular for having a hearing on my bill, the World War II Women's Memorial Location Act, which I co-lead with my good friend and colleague, Representative Fulcher. This bill authorizes the National Mall as the location of the memorial, commemorating the service and sacrifice of the women who worked on the home front during World War II. This bill advances a decade-long effort to properly honor the more than 18 million trailblazing women who became known as Rosie the Riveters. Our Rosies answered the call when our nation needed them the most, redefining the role of the American women and opening the door wider for generations to come. During World War II, women went to work in record numbers. As an example, because Rosie's worked in several different places. In fact, we have contests now to see who can get the most Rosies in the same place between California and Michigan. We are right now ahead. But at Ford Motors Company, Willow Run Bomber Plant in Michigan, women made up 1/3 of the workforce that turned out one complete B-24 Liberator bomber every 55 minutes. Many women worked in jobs previously reserved for men, such as riveters and welders, proving themselves and the world what Americans could do. And you know, the Rosies, like our World War II veterans, I've been to funerals for 3 of them in the last month. They're wonderful, inspiring women. We were able to host 2 flights, and always with a Republican colleague, honor flights. First time, Candace Miller and I, that they had ever been honored in an honor flight. And then Lisa McLean and I did one last year. We need to remember what they've done and celebrate their contributions and do it while their memory, we can get their stories. They're dying every day. This bill will take us one critical step closer to ensuring our Rosies receive the recognition they deserve. In 2022, Congress passed bipartisan legislation authorizing the establishment of a memorial dedicated to the Rosies. However, additional legislation is needed to permit the memorial to be located near the existing World War II memorial. I'm proud to lead this bipartisan legislation and help complete the story of World War II in our nation's front yard. I urge my colleagues on the committee to support the World War II Women's Memorial Location Act, which was carefully crafted to respect the Commemorative Works Act process, honoring the legacy of the Rosies and ensuring that the memorial may be located at a site nearby the existing World War II memorial. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Dingell. I now recognize Representative Onder for 5 minutes on H.R. 1945.
Thank you, Chairman Tiffany, Ranking Member Hughes, members of the subcommittee. I want to thank you all for the opportunity to testify. The acoustics in this room are too good. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of my bill, H.R. 1945, America's National Churchill Museum National Historic Landmark Act. This bill would formally recognize America's National Churchill Museum in Fulton, Missouri as a National Historic Landmark, a designation that is both long overdue and deeply deserved. Nearly 80 years ago in 1946, Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri hosted one of the most consequential speeches in the 20th century. That's Winston Churchill's famous Sinews of Peace speech, which became known as the Iron Curtain speech. With President Harry Truman at his side, Churchill warned the world of the division descending over Europe. Many historians mark that moment as the beginning of the Cold War. But even more, it was a call to defend democracy, strengthen alliances, and uphold the principles of freedom. To honor Churchill's words and legacy, Westminster College embarked on an extraordinary project. Rather than erecting a simple statue or plaque, the church acquired, transported, and painstakingly reconstructed a Christopher Wren church from London, a building whose history stretches back over 900 years. St. Mary the Virgin Aldermanbury survived the Great Fire of London in 1666, was rebuilt by Wren, and then was nearly destroyed again during the Blitz of World War II. Its walls stood in ruin for 2 decades in London before being stripped stone by stone across the Atlantic and rebuilt in Fulton as a memorial to Churchill's leadership and vision. I urge the committee to support this bill and ensure that America's National Churchill Museum receives the recognition it so clearly merits as a National Historic Landmark. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Representative Onder. We're going to move on to our second panel. I want to remind the witnesses that under committee rules, you must limit your oral statements to 5 minutes, but your entire statement will appear in the hearing record. To begin your testimony, please press the on button on the microphone. We use timing lights. When you begin, the light will turn green. At the end of the 5 minutes, the light will turn red, and I'll ask you to please complete your statement. First, I would like to recognize Ms. Natalie Randall, Managing Director at the Utah Office of Tourism and Film Commission. Ms. Randall, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Tiffany, Ranking Member Nagoose, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for having me here today. It's my pleasure to speak with you. My name is Natalie Randall. I am the Managing Director for the Utah Office of Tourism and Film Commission here from Salt Lake City. I'm here today to testify in support of the Semiquincentennial Tourism and Access to Recreation Sites Act, or more simply put, the STARS Act, which is ultimately in an effort to support our federal lands and speak to the importance of expanding public access to our national parks and public lands as we prepare to commemorate what we all know simply as America 250. In my capacity as the director for the Utah Office of Tourism, I have the opportunity to partner and work closely with rural communities, urban communities, businesses, tribes, outdoor recreation partners, public land management agencies to promote responsible access, economic opportunity, and stewardship of our nation's extraordinary natural and cultural resources, many of which are known in Utah, and as a result, we oftentimes say in Utah, Mother Nature played favorites. National parks and public lands are not only a cherished part of America's heritage, but also vital economic engines for communities nationwide. In Utah alone, our national park sites attracted over 15.7 million visitors in 2023, contributing more than $1.9 billion in visitor spending and supporting 26,500 local jobs. Designating September 17th in 2026 as a fee-free day celebrating America 250 will encourage even greater public participation in this historic milestone, allowing accessible visitation to our national park areas. Utah is globally renowned for our 5 national parks. Globally, we're known for our Mighty Five, as they're often called. That's not to take away from the 13 other national places that are also in our state. For the gateway communities in these areas, tourism is truly the lifeblood and the key driving force behind the primary source of income and economy for many Utahns. This has sparked what we call a ripple effect, leading to improvements for Utahns in their local amenities and their infrastructure, sustaining locally owned restaurants and storefronts, as well as supporting road improvements and well-equipped community services. The invitation and accessibility a fee-free day creates allows for these communities to share their heritage with visitors across the country and the world. In Utah, our America 250 celebration leans into 3 key principles and themes: to educate, engage, and to unite, including a focus on the power of Utah's landscapes. These landscapes truly offer a powerful lens through which we can view the past, serve as a jumping point for adventure, and foster learning of the mountains, deserts, and waterways Utahns call home. We hope that by celebrating outdoors, Utahns and visitors can take time to examine our natural environments and use them to find connections with each other and our country's history, something we need more than ever right now. I commend Congresswoman Maloy for introducing this legislation and urge this to be an opportunity and a unifying way for Americans to gather, reflect, and celebrate our nation's history and the places that tell our stories. Thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Randall. I now recognize Mr. Tim Riley, the Sandra L. and Monroe E. Trout Director and Chief Curator of America's National Churchill Museum. Mr. Riley, you have 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, members of the committee, I'm pleased to be with you today along with my colleagues, Westminster College President Don Lofi and the college's board chair, Jim Morton, to express our strong support for this bill. This legislation rightly recognizes the national significance of America's National Churchill Museum at Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri, the site of Winston Churchill's world-changing 1946 address, The Sinews of Peace, commonly known today as the Iron Curtain speech. Churchill's most famous post-war address was a clarion call to Western democracies, imploring them to work together to create a secure and peaceful world. Churchill's speech was also a stern warning that an Iron Curtain had descended across the continent of Europe, creating an ideological divide between communism and Western democracy. Historians, including Churchill himself, agree that the Cold War era began with that powerful speech at Westminster College. It was in America's heartland, almost 80 years ago, in the rural capital of Callaway County, Missouri, where Churchill, with President Truman at his side, delivered a speech and changed the world. So great was the power of Churchill's prose that 15 years after the speech, college officials desired to establish a memorial to Churchill, his speech, and legacy. It will not be surprising to this august body that the college did what it thought necessary to mark the moment. It formed a committee. And so it happened. One committee member suggested putting up a statue. Another suggested a Sinews of Peace memorial garden as the usual, if not pedestrian, tributes. These were dismissed. Instead, college president Robert Davidson had a bold alternative idea: to relocate from London to Fulton, the war-scarred Christopher Wren Church of St. Mary Aldermanbury, and rebuild it on our campus to honor Churchill's speech. The venerable building first appeared in British records in the 1100s. It stood proudly in London for 500 years. William Shakespeare lived a block away. The original Aldermanbury was destroyed during the Great Fire of London in 1666, before King Charles II asked Sir Christopher Wren to rebuild it along with 50 other churches, including the famed St. Paul's Cathedral. More recently, but no less tragically, during the Second World War, on December 29, 1940, German warplanes dropped 20,000 incendiary bombs on London. In one of the worst raids of the Blitz, the Second Great Fire began. At the time, Churchill commanded at all costs, save St. Paul's. Firefighters bravely battled the blazes. The next morning, as the smoke rose above the city, the iconic dome of St. Paul's was saved. Aldermanbury suffered a different fate. The ruins of the church stood in London for 2 decades until Westminster College, with private support from Americans across the nation, raised funds to dismantle the ruins, 7,000 stones, and transport them 4,000 miles to the middle of Missouri, where they were reassembled as the Churchill Memorial. Ladies and gentlemen, the building we speak about today has been a landmark in some form or fashion on our shores or across the Atlantic for almost 900 years. Today, we ask that it formally be designated a United States national landmark. Churchill was immensely proud of his American heritage and often reminded audiences, including Congress, that his mother was American and his ancestors fought with Washington's army. Congress passed a resolution authorizing President Kennedy to confer upon Sir Winston our nation's first honorary citizenship in 1962. In 1963, Churchill, at age 88, endorsed the project at Fulton, calling it an imaginative concept, adding it would be a symbol for the hope of peace and the future of mankind. And so it is. Built by the British, bombed by the Germans, and rebuilt by Americans in Missouri, St. Mary Aldermanbury stands today as a beacon of resilience. It is a symbol of steadfastness in the face of adversity, a Churchillian trait and an American one, to be sure. Since 2020, Westminster College has invested $6 million in the preservation of the museum. Ladies and gentlemen, we are committed to preserving our rich history so that new generations can learn from it. I think it appropriate to let Churchill have the final word today. These words from 1943 seem fitting. He said, "We shape our buildings, and afterwards our buildings shape us." In America's National Churchill Museum at Westminster College, we have a landmark that continues to shape us in a most meaningful manner. Thank you.
It certainly was a treat of his to have the final word. Thank you, Mr. Riley. Next, I'd like to introduce Ms. Raya Kenny, the Executive Director of the World War II Women's Memorial Foundation. Ms. Kenny, you have 5 minutes.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of H.R. 2290, the World War II Women's Memorial Location Act. I am Raya Kenny, and I am the Executive Director of the World War II Women's Memorial Foundation. And our mission is to establish a monument to honor the service and sacrifice of the more than 18 million women who worked on the home front during World War II. This initiative began more than a decade ago as a 5th grade school project. My social studies teacher asked me to build a model monument to someone or something not yet commemorated in Washington, D.C. At the time, I had just watched the film A League of Their Own, a film about the women who stepped up to the plate, so to speak, to keep baseball in American lives during World War II. And I was very inspired to learn more about America's Rosies and dedicate my school project to them. As I researched the role of the American women in World War II, I discovered that more than 18 million women answered the call to hold down the home front by entering more than 80 different new industries for the very first time, working as coders, pilots, engineers, taxi drivers, mail carriers, everything under the sun. These women served as the backbone of the war effort, and many directly contributed by building munitions, planes, tanks, and other equipment that was needed by our American troops. As General Eisenhower once said, the contribution of the women of America, whether on the farm or in the factory or in uniform, to D-Day was a sine qua non, or necessary for, the invasion effort. America's Rosies also changed the landscape of the American workforce. Between 1940 and 1945, American women jumped from being 27 to being nearly 40% of the workforce. So at 10 years old, I built this model monument using wood, concrete, fake grass, and this silver Sharpie pen. My teacher then encouraged me to follow it and pursue it for real. And I took her suggestion seriously, and what followed has been years of advocacy with the National Park Service, Congress, and other relevant stakeholders. In 2022, Congress authorized my memorial to be built in Washington, D.C., and I was honored to testify before the subcommittee as part of the initial authorization process. The next step was to assess the most appropriate location for the memorial within our nation's capital. We worked with a consultant to conduct a preliminary site selection study, and we found that the locations with the strongest thematic and historical nexuses are adjacent to the World War II memorial, or slightly northwest of that memorial in Constitution Gardens, where the so-called government girls worked in the temporary munitions buildings that were there during the war. Both of these sites are in the reserve. And the National Capital Memorial Advisory Commission also previously wrote to a letter to this committee that, quote, in order to thematically connect the memorial with other memorials commemorating that era, the foundation may eventually consider sites located in Area 1. I strongly believe that the memorial should be honoring these millions of American women should be dedicated within walking distance of the World War II memorial, just as the Vietnam Women's Memorial was dedicated yards away from the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. However, the National Park Service and the other relevant entities involved in this ongoing site selection process cannot even consider those locations without the additional congressional authority. And that is why I'm seeking your support for H.R. 2290 that would make the memorial eligible to be built within Area 1 or the reserve. Last Congress, this legislation garnered more than 60 bipartisan co-sponsors in the House, and on March 24th of this year, the bill was reintroduced on a bipartisan, bicameral basis. We are very grateful to our House leads, Representatives Dingell and Representative Fulcher, as well as our more than 30 bipartisan House co-sponsors, for their determination to help complete the story of World War II on our mall. Importantly, while the official design phase won't come until later in the process, we do currently envision that the memorial would be relatively small in size, less than 1/4 of an acre of space, low to the ground, and unobtrusive to our beautiful national landscape. Small, but impactful. Swift action to establish this memorial is vital, as many of their Rosies are celebrating their centennial birthdays at this point, and we must honor their contributions to America and not allow their stories to be lost. Today, as we near the 80th anniversary of our victory in World War II and the 250th birthday of our great nation, it is high time that we ensure that their service and sacrifice of these American women of World War II are eternally etched into our collective memory. Thank you for allowing me to testify. I very much appreciate it. And I also want to thank the Rosies for allowing me to share and to preserve their history, because it is a high honor. If there's one thing I've learned from them, it's that we can do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kenny. Finally, I'm pleased to introduce Ms. Jackie Gingrich Cushman, Chair of the Adams Memorial Commission. Ms. Cushman, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Tiffany and the subcommittee. I am Jackie Gingrich Cushman, and I serve as the chair of the Adams Memorial Commission. I am so grateful to be here today. I am thankful for you scheduling this hearing and for allowing me to come and testify. I'm thankful for your interest in this legislation and this topic. This legislation, H.R. 2306, will allow us to complete the establishment memorial to the Adams family. We are committed to completing the work given to us by Congress. I was appointed to the Adams Memorial Commission by President Trump in December of 2020. By law, the commission could not begin its work until we had a majority of the members appointed. That happened when Speaker Johnson appointed 4 congressmen, Congressman Moolenaar, Congressman Griffith, Lynch, and Connolly in December of 2023. We are sorry that Congressman Connolly has passed from us. We miss him greatly. We began our first meeting soon after that in January of 2024, at which point I was elected chair. So now you understand why I'm here before you today after this long, involved process. This is a very important legislation because it would spur us on to be able to complete what was brought before this Congress over 20 years ago. And what we need to do is to make sure that the support is not only giving us the time, the energy, but also the public support needed to finish this memorial. The proposed legislation will reauthorize the commission, provide an additional site to be included in the selection process, and delineate clear guidelines for future appropriations. Before I focus on the legislation, I'd like to take a minute to talk about the Adams legacy. And it's appropriate because we're here talking about America's 250th, and we would not be able to celebrate this without the Adams family. The absence of the Adams Memorial in the National Mall leaves it incomplete. Adams was the voice of the Revolution. He nominated George Washington as commander-in-chief. He suggested that Thomas Jefferson write the Declaration of Independence. And on the floor in the Continental Congress, he was the strongest advocate for the Declaration. Without him, I know that we would not have declared it when we did and how we did it. Would we have declared our freedom? Absolutely. But he was the lead voice to make sure that we did it at that time. Being from Massachusetts, he understood what was happening and how important it was. Richard Stockton, a delegate from New York, wrote that Adams was the man to whom the country is most indebted for the great measure of independency. He it was who sustained the debate by the force of his reasoning, demonstrated not only the justice, but the expediency of the measure. He penned the Massachusetts Constitution, the oldest constitution still in effect, on which our own Constitution is based. He was an ardent advocate for independence when most colonists still believed we should remain British subjects. He was our first vice president, the first president to live in the White House. His wife, Abigail, was clearly his closest advisor. We have thousands of letters between them and Jefferson. They are treasure trove of information. Just for writing the letters, we should honor him. It leads us so much information about what was happening, what was being thought, and how we came to where we are. Their son, John Quincy Adams, who was groomed from birth to serve our nation, served as our 6th president and was the primary architect of the Monroe Doctrine. Afterwards, he served in Congress and was known as the hellhound of slavery. He successfully argued the homicide case, and his son, Charles Adams, was ambassador to the British during the Civil War and prevented the British from recognizing the Confederacy. This family has a long history and has shaped this country for generations. It is up to us to recognize what they have done. The legislation does 3 things. First, it reauthorizes the commission. Second, it allows for an ideal new site, a parcel northeast on the ellipse, currently occupied by an unused, derelict visitors pavilion from the 1990s. This location near the White House is perfect for a memorial to the Adams family. It would extend the north-south axis of the Founding Fathers Memorial to honor John Adams as the first president to inhabit the White House. Third, it provides measure funding, allowing federal appropriations of up to $50 million, but requiring one-to-one private matching funds. We've partnered with the Adams Memorial Foundation to raise private donations and don't anticipate appropriations before the construction phase is closed. So, at the conclusion, let me just say, now at the 250th, now is the time to honor the Adams family. Benjamin Rush called Adams and Jefferson the North and the South Poles of the American Revolution. We have the South Pole, right? We have the Jefferson Monument, and then we have Washington. We need the North Pole. We need Adams recognized. We need the Adams family recognized. Chairman Tiffany, as you mentioned earlier, the 250th is about educating, commemorating, and uniting our nation. This is a memorial that would do just that. The Adams family have a long legacy, and it's time for us to honor them. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Cushman. I'm now going to recognize members for 5 minutes for their questions, and we will start with the gentleman from Idaho, Mr. Fulcher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for doing this hearing. This is one of those, not all our hearings are very fun, right?
This is fun.
And let's be honest, they're just not. This one is a real honor. Thank you for hosting this and being the chair. Mr. Chairman, I'm proud to co-lead the bipartisan World War II Women's War Memorial Location Act along with Congresswoman Dingell. I want to thank Raya Kenny for your role in all this. We've got a question for you here in just a moment. But as has been stated, just the brief recap is with millions of men overseas in this World War II era, American women, popularly known as the Rosies, stepped into the roles traditionally held by those men. And those women answered the call to service by holding down the home front, working as pilots and engineers, electricians, mechanics, and many, many more. In my home state of Idaho, civilian women worked and volunteered at the Farragut Naval Training Station in northern Idaho. And here's a piece of trivia that I'm just going to add in there. That's the birthplace of the nuclear Navy. Now, most people don't realize in the state of Idaho, which is entirely landlocked, that's where it was born, in that research location, along with the what's now the Idaho National Lab for Propulsion and the University of Idaho for Communications. That's where the nuclear Navy was started. And that we had many of the Rosies serving there and participating in all that history. So that was built as a concealed location for research, top secret, because it was inland. And it was built shortly after the attack on Pearl Harbor. It's still there today, by the way. It became the second largest naval training base in the country, and their presence was felt across every state, countless shipyards, factories, farms, and ranches. Despite their monumental contributions, we still lack an independent, prominent memorial in Washington, D.C. honoring these patriots. There's the urgency to pass this bill so that the living Rosies, Ryan, I'm going to just inject right quick. Do you have any idea how many Rosies might still be alive?
I don't have an exact number on that. I wish I did, but I do know that their numbers are dwindling with every month that passes during this effort, which is why we're seeking such urgency for the quick passage of this legislation, so that they may have the opportunity to come and see themselves memorialized in this
As
space.
with all of our heroes, and so I agree on the timing. But we want them to see their their legacy commemorated, and we can fold that into the broader America 250 effort, which has also been referenced here today. But the memorial's construction will be funded entirely through private donations, won't use any taxpayer dollars. And Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'd like to ask unanimous consent. I've got 3 letters here in support of this, and it's from the Women's Veterans Alliance, from the Rosie River Trust, and the World War II Women's Memorial Foundation. I'd request unanimous consent to put those in the record today.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And with that, I ask for my colleagues to support this legislation. Just one last question while I've got time, Raya. This couldn't have been a total smooth sailing effort. Obviously, you've made a lot of progress since being in 5th grade. But take just a minute, because that's literally all that we've got left. Tell us about some of the obstacles that you had to overcome.
It has been a very long process, but it's been a very rewarding one. The length of time has allowed me, while it's been frustrating at times to have taken 3 steps forward and then Congress turns over and you sort of have to start from the beginning, while that part has been frustrating, the rewarding part has been being able to meet people who have Rosies in their families and who have been able to discover those Rosie stories and preserve them, becoming aware of our memorial efforts and wanting to dedicate themselves to it in whatever way they can. Though it's been long and lengthy and complicated at times, I definitely look at that as the light at the end of this brilliant tunnel we're working through
Well,
right now.
thank you for that, and to our panelists and for all of your efforts. And it's an honor to be able to support this here in our subcommittee today. Mr. Chairman, with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize the gentle lady from Utah for questions, Ms. Maloy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Randall, thank you for being here today. Excuse me. I know you represent the Utah tourism industry, and the STARS Act is going to impact all of the states because we're talking about all the national parks. But could you just talk a little bit about what role national parks play in connecting visitors with the historical significance of America's founding and our history and our unique landscapes and places?
Of course, thank you, Congresswoman, for the question. In Utah specifically, in 1776, you mentioned this, but 2 Franciscan fathers friars, I should say, came into our state, Dominguez and Escalante, on an expedition. They were traveling from Santa Fe and explored through Utah, Colorado, and Arizona, and eventually returned back to New Mexico, not finding a clear path forward. It was September and October of that year that they did that. And honestly, the landscapes haven't changed much from the time that they were in our state, which is now known as Utah at the time. They experienced interactions with Native American communities, they experienced interactions with the landscapes, and those are the interactions, as you mentioned earlier, that we see as the opportunity to allow for all Americans and international visitors that are coming into our state to experience and help them understand the history of these landscapes and see that through the eyes of the beautiful landscapes we have, both in Utah and across the country.
Thank you. And on a related note, can you talk a little bit about how granting everyone access to the parks can help bring some of the underserved communities and people who are not traditionally in the parks into the celebration of America's birthday?
Of course. Many individuals and underserved communities don't have the opportunity to experience the outdoors. We know nationwide that there have been issues with depression and various other things, and we know in Utah specifically that getting outside, and in Utah, one of the things that we're doing to celebrate America 250 is Walk 250. Experiencing the outdoors is extremely healing. And so the opportunity of this allows for anyone of any walk of life to be able to come into any national park in our nation and experience an opportunity that is truly life-changing. We've had the opportunity to do that in Utah, and I think sometimes maybe we take it for granted, but so many other individuals that I meet in my role have never had that opportunity to even see a dark sky, and it's truly transformational.
Thank you. I agree, and I really hope people will take advantage of this opportunity, whether it's going to a historic site or going to a landscape park, to just find something new that they didn't know about the United States or didn't have the opportunity to appreciate before. And thank you for being here to testify. I don't have very much time left, so I just want to thank the other 3 of you for being here. I love history. I love reading history. I talk about John Quincy Adams whenever I do a night tour of the Capitol with constituents, and I really appreciate the work that all of you are doing to help preserve our history in this country and make it accessible to people who want to study it, or maybe even people who don't know they want to study it until they stumble across a monument and learn about the Rosies during World War II. Or something about Winston Churchill, who, while he's not an American, is responsible for a lot of the freedom in this world. And I love that we're celebrating his American connections and the debt that we owe Winston Churchill, who's a fascinating, kind of a complicated figure, multifaceted, and I think even studying that is helpful and instructive for us moving forward, that people in history have complicated lives and they can still go forward and do amazing things, And I hope as we're celebrating the 250th birthday of our country, we celebrate that about ourselves and other people around the world who are trying to make a difference. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for being involved, and I'm about out of time, so I will yield back.
Gentlelady yields. I'd like to now recognize Dr. Kennedy for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to our witnesses for being here today. 3 out of 4 weeks of the month, I come to Washington myself from Utah, and I recognize what a challenge it is for us to get here. So wherever you come from, thank you very much for coming here and giving us your testimony. Thinking a lot about the theme, and Mr. Chair, thank you for convening this, because the theme is how can we presently pay honor and respect to the past, and that is the ancient past. If we talk about the canyon lands and arches, national monuments, the Mighty Five that are in the state of Utah, where I represent 2 out of the 5 amazing national parks. These are millions of years old history, and then the more recent past, considering World War II and Churchill and so on. And I'm really grateful that we as a society can consider presently how do we honor those that came in the past, considering the fact that the past informs the present on a regular basis. And that's, I think, an undercurrent associated with what we're doing today. So thanks so much for being here today. And I'm grateful to have the opportunity to talk a bit about something that I think is really important. Ms. Randall, thanks for being willing to talk to us about our national parks. I'm interested in your, so a couple components of your testimony. One is just, tell me about what it means to an average person who's never seen a places like Arches National Monument or Zion National Park. What does it mean to those people to come and witness and experience something like that? Can you give me a sense of that? Because you spoke about it some in your testimony. And I think of my first time going to these places, and it's unexpressible until you've experienced it yourself. It's almost like witnessing the birth of a baby or having a baby yourself. These are things that you can, in theory, kind of understand, but to stand in front of delicate arch, which I'm interested in how many are in the room have actually seen any of these places. And I'll just say to you, if you haven't, you really need to make it a once-in-a-lifetime experience of having to get to one of these places. The dark sky experience that you're describing as well. These are unexpressible experiences that until you've witnessed the grandeur, the glory associated with that, then you're missing out. And I'll say the birth of a baby is an amazing experience. So I'll liken those. I've delivered babies, so I just think babies are great, and I think Arches National Park is also great. So, Ms. Randall, would you, for those of us especially that haven't had that experience, tell me about what that is like for these people to have that experience the first time?
Of course. Thank you for the question, Dr. Kennedy. And it's an honor, too, to be with 2 of our representatives for our state that represent all of our 5 national parks. Again, there's 13 other national areas as well that would be accessible as a result of this act, too. At the Utah Office of Tourism, our mission is to be a state united and welcoming the world to experience awe-inspiring adventure. And that awe-inspiring adventure is truly what it is. As you mentioned, it's transformational. I have a son. I won't dive into what you mentioned that experience was like, but I took him for the first time. Both of you know I'm from San Juan County, down in that region. And we oftentimes forget about what's in our backyard. As a result, my 8-year-old has never been to Arches, so we took him for the first time a couple weekends ago. We've, of course, enjoyed the backcountry of Canyonlands. We've backpacked with him through that area. And to walk around that bend and see delicate arch through his eyes was truly transformational. And to have that opportunity to share that with my son and the future generation of Utahns. And I think about the economic impact that has as well. This allows for our communities and our generations, especially in rural Utah, to not be exported children, to find opportunities as a result of this positive asset that we've been given at the state of Utah.
Thanks, marvelous. And yeah, to walk around that bend, and it takes work. For any that haven't been to Arches, you need to know it takes work to get to Delicate Arch. You're not gonna find it an easy experience. It's dry, it's dusty, it's a little bit altitude, but it's an amazing experience. It's doable for everybody in this room, and for most people that listen to me, it's doable. And I would encourage you to try. I don't want to dissuade you from doing that, but So I've been to the Churchill Museum in England, and I just find Winston Churchill to be an amazing person. The World War II Rosies that we're talking about, the fact that these people, they don't get all the glory, laud, and honor associated with the people that wielded guns in World War II, but the reality is that they were vital to the work that we did. And I always am talking about John Adams and John Quincy Adams when I take people on the tour as well at the Capitol. So all four of you represent something really important, and I'm appreciative of the work that you're doing and supportive of that. And I'll particularly congratulate my colleague from Utah for this opportunity for people to go to something that once you've experienced the national parks and you get a sense of the small human nature of an individual, and that things long after we're dead and long before we were born, that these things are present, that all of a sudden our perspective can change and we can take life more seriously for the precious gift that it is, because it's very limited when you look at something that's been existent, like the delicate arch, that's been existent for millions of years, and it will be existent long after we're gone from this place. Mr. Chair, thank you very much for allowing me to speak a bit, and thanks to our witnesses for being here today.
Gentleman yields. I'm not sure my wife would compare childbirth to seeing the spectacular arches out in Utah. I'd now like to recognize the gentleman from Michigan for 5 minutes, Mr. Moolenaar.
Thank you, Chairman Tiffany, and also want to thank you and Vice Chairman Kennedy, Ranking Member Negus, the members of the committee for holding this hearing today. I appreciate this Natural Resources Committee and the colleagues who serve on this subcommittee on federal lands for considering this legislation, H.R. 2306, the Adams Memorial Great American Heroes Act. And like each of you, I have an interest in ensuring that our American story and the leaders who most profoundly shaped it are appropriately represented in the monuments, memorials, and other features our constituents experience here in our nation's capital. The National Mall is home to a monument to Washington and memorials to Jefferson and Lincoln. However, there's no recognition for our second president, John Adams, and the key role he and his family had in the founding of our nation. Adams first nominated George Washington to command the Continental Army. He helped draft the Declaration of Independence, was appointed as the Commissioner to France, served as our nation's first vice president, and of course our second president was the first occupant of the White House. He was the voice of the American Revolution, and as president he oversaw the establishment of Washington, D.C. as the new seat of our federal government and addressed the Congress the first time the body met in the new Capitol. His family sacrificed alongside him in service to our nation, namely his wife Abigail and his son Charles. There was also his other son, our sixth president, John Quincy Adams, and his wife Louisa Catherine Adams. And the entire Adams family dedicated their lives to our country from the Revolution through the Civil War. And the family was instrumental in the early success of our nation and embodied Americans' core values. I believe it's only right to recognize this incredible family's service to our nation and provide a monument to the lasting impact the Adams family has on the United States. This bill fulfills the intent of Congress to do so by extending the life of the Adams Memorial Commission, which has worked tirelessly over the years to bring this vision to life, and provides reasonable federal support for the effort, which will continue to rely on private philanthropy and partnerships along the lines of previous federal memorials. The bill also provides for the consideration of a small area within the reserve as a suitable site for the memorial in South President's Park, near the White House, whose first resident, as I mentioned earlier, was none other than John Adams. As we prepare to commemorate the 250th anniversary of the founding of our nation, I can think of no better way to celebrate the ethos of our country than by paying tribute to a family that has sacrificed so much to shape and guide it through its infancy. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for your consideration of this legislation, the Adams Memorial Great American Heroes Act, and I would ask the committee to vote in its favor. And I yield back.
The gentleman yields, and thank you for your testimony. We appreciate it very much. I'm going to take a couple minutes for questions here. First of all, Mr. Riley, I have to say, one of the most favorite winters I had in northern Wisconsin, which can be long, is we had a seasonal business, a hospitality business, and so I had time in the winter to read. I read the entire, it was in a 6-volume tome that Winston Churchill wrote in regards to the run-up to World War II and then post-World War II. That is one of the most seminal works of that era that we shall ever see, and it's a tribute to Churchill that so many Americans understand who he was and where his standing is in world history. I'd like you to talk about the approach that has been taken with this, where it's federally recognized without placing it under federal management. Tell me about that approach, and do you believe it works, and do you think it could be extended to other opportunities?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I will be delighted to answer your question, but before I do, I would be remiss by not pointing out that with us today is Edward Churchill, the great grandson of Clementine and Winston Churchill. I think he may have just left the room, so I missed my moment, but he was with us today to lend this. We're always delighted that Churchills are back in Washington. To your question, designated America's National Churchill Museum formally as a national landmark, I think will pay great dividends. The museum is located at Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri, the capital of Callaway County, population 12,000. It's a very small town in a rural part of the country. And we believe that designating this as a national landmark will be really instrumental in driving tourism. We are the largest tourism attraction in the county. We believe that this recognition will also allow us to consider future partnerships with federal agencies. The final section in the bill asks the Department of the Interior to help conduct a resource study to explore just what you're talking about. Are there other opportunities for us to partner more formally to continue to advance the mission of the museum, to inspire and inform next generation?
So this approach, recognition without federal acquisition, has worked for you. Is that accurate?
Yes. We believe this is going to be a terrific opportunity for us, yes.
Ms. Cushman, what is the, how does the Adams Family Memorial help support President Trump's executive order? You know, President Trump has really taken leadership here in recognizing our 250th and just talking about these great pieces of statues, or whatever the case may be, buildings, statues, all the rest, that we recognize the greatness of American history. How does this help support the President's executive order?
Chairman Tiffany, thank you for that question. I think it does it in a variety of ways. As you mentioned earlier, the 250th is here not only to commemorate but educate, and we're partnering with the Adams Memorial Foundation, which will provide the education component around the Adams Memorial, really talking about their life of service and inspiring our citizens today to also engage in a life of service. Also, President Trump talks a lot about unity. This is a bipartisan bill. You know, Adams was a Federalist president, the last Federalist president, so we have no Federalist Party today. He is loved by, as you hear, everybody loves Adams. I have yet to meet anyone who does not love Adams. If you don't love Adams, please let me know afterwards. So it really is a great unifying. What I really like about this memorial in particular is that it recognizes not only John Adams and John Quincy, but also their wives and their family, which is so important to our American story. I mean, this family gave so much to our nation. And for us to be able to recognize that and realize this memorial is not in service to them, it's really in service to our nation. It allows us a chance to unify around something that we understand spurs us to be better than we should be, which they did, right? We're all called to action and the chance that we have. But also it reminds us that people can make a huge difference. And lastly, I'm sure you know, but President Trump recently hung both Abigail and John Adams in the cabinet room. And so, again, the founders are increasingly important, and I think now at the 250th, it's the right time to go back and finish the Adams Memorial.
Yeah, one quick final question. For the fiscal hawks that are
Yes.
out there, could you elaborate a little bit on why you think it's necessary for taxpayer dollars to be put into this effort?
It's a fantastic question, absolutely. I'm a fiscal conservative, so I think it's a great question. I want to address it head on. So we do have fiscal conservatives on the commission, including myself. We have Congressman Moolenaar, who just left, but I appreciate him coming, and Congressman Morgan Griffith, who I'm sure you know is a fiscal conservative. So this is a very measured approach. It provides parameters, so it is a max 50 million, one-to-one private-public match. So we raise the private funds first, then we come back during the construction phase and ask for appropriations. And it also limits 4% in terms of administrative costs. So it is very well contained. And if you look at the FDR Memorial, which is 80% publicly funded, or the Eisenhower, which is 90% publicly funded, this is max 50% match with the public funding. Very, very measured approach.
Thank you all for your testimony. And now I'll turn to the gentleman from Minnesota for his questions, Mr. Stauber. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Chair Tiffany. My district in northern Minnesota is home to incredible recreation opportunities, many of which are on public lands like Voyageurs National Park, as well as both the Superior and the Chippewa National Forest. Recreation and tourism are a major part of the local economy across the gateway communities in northern Minnesota. That's part of the reason why I've always fought for expanded recreational access on our public lands. Expanded access doesn't only serve the Americans who seek to enjoy our beautiful public lands, it benefits the gateway communities and the local economies where these lands are located. That's why I am proud to support the STARS Act introduced by Representative Maloy. This legislation will help encourage more Americans to visit our national parks and will be a great way to celebrate America's 250th anniversary. Ms. Randall, communities across Utah, like northern Minnesota, are highly dependent on recreational access to support their local economies. Can you speak about how these communities suffer when the National Park Service or other federal land managers limit recreation access on our lands?
Thank you for the question. I'd be happy to respond. We often say in Utah, as I know with many of my colleagues across the United States that have public land areas in their states, that there's a ripple effect that happens as a result of having these public lands in our communities. Ensuring accessibility to those areas allows for these communities to thrive. These gateway communities are wholly dependent oftentimes and don't have diverse economies, and so are significantly dependent on the tourism or outdoor recreation economies to ensure that those residents can live there, have jobs, invest.
So when the federal government, when the federal government or other land managers reduce the access, that's a big hit to our local economies who are not only looking to sustain their economies but build it up, correct? The small businesses are definitely hurt. Would you agree with that statement?
Yes, I would agree.
Thank you. The STARS Act would waive fees on national parks for one day, increasing visitors. But visitors to our national parks typically don't come once. They often come back year after year, generations of families. So how could the STARS Act benefit local communities beyond the single fee-free day? Ms. Randall.
Thank you for the question. I would agree. Not only does it create accessibility for that single day, but it also creates the awareness of this amazing asset that we have in our communities and encourages those visitors to come back and explore more. There isn't one national park or one national monument or one public place. 56 national parks in the United States alone. So.
Yeah. So I've been to your great state several times in the last couple of years. It's I believe it might be the second most beautiful state in the country. I think I'm getting heat from all sides here. Obviously, you have what an opportunity in your great state, and Representative Maloy has just been a steward of supporting Utah and its economy. So with the last minute 35, I will yield my time to Representative Maloy.
Thank you. I will be a good steward of this last minute and a half I have. And Natalie, I'm not putting you back in the hot seat. There was one thing I wanted to bring up and I ran out of time. But Ms. Kenney, I think the fact that you're here is a testament to a lot of what we're talking about here. Where these are all efforts to pay homage to people who have helped us be what we are as a nation, and the resources and the assets that we have as a nation, and make sure everybody can participate in that. But your story, I think, is particularly an American success story. You were a motivated fifth grader who got really into a school project, and now as a result of that, you're sitting here testifying in front of Congress. And I think that's what we're trying to capture with all of these, that every American has a story of how they got here, how their ancestors got here, and not all those stories start out pretty, but we all benefit from the same protections and freedoms in this country. And I just wanted to say thank you for being an example of what one person can do in this country to make changes. And with that, I yield back again.
Will the gentleman yield the balance of his time to the chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to close here by saying thank you to all of you for joining us today. But I want to thank President Trump for his leadership. He understands that these symbols are very important to the American ideal, to the greatness of a nation, that you have to recognize your past, and it's important to recognize your past in order for a culture to stay whole, for a culture to continue. And I just want to thank the President so much for his leadership on this, and thank all of you for doing your part as citizens of this great United States of America. Thank you so much. And thank you for your valuable testimony, and members for your questions. Members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for our witnesses today, and we will ask that you respond to those in writing. Under Committee Rule 3, members of the subcommittee must submit questions to the subcommittee clerk by 5 p.m. on Monday, July 21, 2025. The hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for those responses. If there is no further business, without objection, the Subcommittee on Federal Lands stands adjourned.